The Wyoming wind has a voice, and on the high plains it speaks of death. It was this wind that first carried the sound to Lena, a sound that curdled the blood and stole the breath from her lungs, the yips and snarls of a coyote pack frenzied and hungry. 7 months heavy with child, and a year a widow, she was a lone woman against a vast, uncaring wilderness. But it wasn't the threat to her own life that drove her from the shelter of her sod-brick cabin. It was another sound woven through the savage chorus of the predators, the thin, desperate wail of a human baby. The sun was a merciless hammer over the territory, beating down on the cracked earth and bleaching the sparse buffalo grass to the color of bone. For Lena, the heat was a constant oppressive weight, amplifying the ache in her lower back and the swell of her belly. It had been a year since the letter came, the one from the mining company in the Black Hills, written in apologetic, sterile prose that spoke of a shaft collapse and expressed its deepest, most insufficient condolences. A year since her husband, Thomas, had been swallowed by the earth, leaving her stranded in the homestead they were meant to build together. Their cabin, a testament to shared dreams now gathering dust, stood defiant against the endless sky. It was a tiny speck of human endeavor in a landscape that promised nothing and threatened everything. Her world had shrunk to the rhythmic cycle of chores, tending the meager garden, mending Thomas's old shirts for the child he would never meet, and staring at the horizon until her eyes burned a foolish, fading hope that he might yet walk over its shimmering edge. That afternoon, the silence was different. The usual drone of insects had fallen away, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. It was then she heard it. At first, it was a faint, high-pitched keening, almost lost in the mournful sigh of the wind whistling through the eaves of the cabin. She paused, a hand instinctively going to her own rounded stomach. It couldn't be. She was miles from the nearest settlement of Redemption's Bluff, and no one in their right mind would bring an infant into this desolation. Then the other sounds began, a chorus of sharp, excited yips that climbed in pitch to a cacophony of snarling greed. Coyotes! A big pack by the sound of it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They were close. Too close. She grabbed the heavy Winchester rifle from its hooks by the door, the cold steel a familiar if not entirely comforting weight in her hands. But the infant's cry, raw and piercing, cut through the predatory din again. It was a sound that bypassed reason and struck a primal chord deep within her, the call of a mother to a child, any child. It was real. Someone was out there. She didn't think. She acted. Her bare feet, calloused and tough, barely registered the sharp stones and thorny scrub as she ran the rifle in one hand, the other cradling her belly. The sounds grew louder, guiding her towards a shallow ravine, carved into the plains, a jagged scar in the earth. Peering over the edge, her blood ran cold. Down below, in a small, dusty clearing, a coyote pack circled their movements, a fluid, terrifying dance of death. They were lean and mangy, their eyes glowing with a feral light. At the center of their circle, wrapped in a simple buckskin blanket and lying in a woven basket, was a baby. It couldn't have been more than a few days old. Its face was red, and screaming, its tiny fists balled in a futile show of defiance against the inevitable. One of the larger coyotes, its muzzle scarred and its teeth bared, darted in, snapping at the edge of the blanket. A guttural sob escaped Lena's throat. She raised the Winchester, her hands shaking. She was a decent shot, Thomas had taught her, but this was different. These were not tin cans on a fence post. She took a breath, tried to steady her aim on the lead animal, but her vision blurred with tears of rage and fear. She couldn't risk hitting the child. There was only one other choice. With a roar that tore from her soul, a sound of pure maternal fury, she began to scramble down the loose rock of the ravine wall, deliberately sending a cascade of stones and dirt tumbling ahead of her. "Get away!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Get away from him!" The sudden noise and the sight of the descending human figure startled the pack. They were opportunists, not fighters when the odds were uncertain. They hesitated their ears, flattened low growls rumbling in their chests. The lead coyote turned its head, its yellow eyes locking onto hers. It saw the rifle, smelled the scent of a predator, as fierce as any it had known. Lena didn't stop. She hit the floor of the ravine and charged forward, not even thinking to fire, simply using the rifle as a club, a barrier, a physical extension of her will. She screamed until her throat was raw, a litany of curses and pleas and animalistic howls. The pack broke. One by one they peeled away, melting back into the tall grass and the shadows of the rocks, their yips turning from hungry to disgruntled. They vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only the dust, the lingering scent of wild animal, and the now hiccuping cries of the infant. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed beside the basket, the Winchester clattering to the ground. Her body trembled with the aftermath of adrenaline. She reached out a shaky hand and touched the baby's cheek. It was warm, alive. A boy. His skin was a beautiful shade of copper, and a shock of thick black hair covered his head. His dark, almond-shaped eyes, wet with tears, stared up at her, seeming to hold the ancient wisdom of the plains themselves. He was wrapped snugly, and tucked beside him was a small, intricately beaded pouch. As she gently lifted the child into her arms, the pouch fell open, spilling a single perfect eagle feather onto the dusty ground. The baby immediately quieted his cries, softening as he felt the warmth of her body. He rooted instinctively towards her breast, a tiny, trusting mouth, seeking solace. Lena looked around wildly. There was no one, no tracks save for those of the coyotes, no sign of a mother, a father, anyone. Who would do this? Who would leave a newborn to the wild beasts? It was a death sentence. As she held the child close, his small life, a fragile flame in her hands, she felt a profound shift within her. The emptiness that had hollowed her out for a year was suddenly, inexplicably filled. The baby in her arms was a mystery, a miracle, a terrifying responsibility. And as she looked from his face to the vast, empty horizon, she knew her life, the solitary grieving life she had known, was over. A new, far more dangerous one had just begun. The walk back to the cabin was a dreamlike trance. Lena carried the infant cradled against her chest, his warmth a startling contrast to the cold dread that had settled in her gut. With every step, 1,000 questions warred in her mind. Was this a test from God? A cruel trick of fate? The child was clearly of native blood, a fact that would not go unnoticed in Redemption's Bluff. The town, founded on piety and prospector's grit, held a deep-seated fear and mistrust of the Lakota tribes whose ancestral lands they now occupied. To be found with one of their children would be to invite suspicion, accusation, perhaps even violence. She knew she should take the baby to Sheriff Bart Jones, but a powerful possessive instinct had already taken root. This child had been given to her by the wilderness itself. She had faced down death for him. He was in a way that defied logic hers. She named him Leo, a name that felt strong, like the lion-hearted courage he had shown in his first hours of life. She spent the rest of the day in a frantic haze of activity. She found an old wooden crate and lined it with her softest linens to make a makeshift crib. Using a clean strip of cotton and some boiled, cooled water, she managed to get a few precious drops into the baby, who suckled weakly, but with a tenacious will to live. As she cared for him, she studied the impossibly small details of his face, the curve of his ear, the tiny fingernails on his perfect hands. The bond tightened with every passing moment, a fierce, unbreakable thing. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The beauty of it felt like a mockery. As twilight deepened, a new sound reached her, the rhythmic, steady beat of horses' hooves. It wasn't the frantic clip-clop of a lone rider from town. This was different, slower, more deliberate, more than one horse. Her heart leaped into her throat. She snatched the Winchester, her other hand hovering protectively over Leo's crate. Peeking through the single glass-paned window, she saw them. 5 riders sat on horseback, silhouetted against the dying light. They were not cowboys or prospectors. They were Lakota warriors. Their long hair braided their bare chests, adorned with paint and beads. They sat motionless, their faces stern and unreadable spears held upright in their hands. They were not attacking. They were waiting, watching. At their center was a man who carried himself with an authority that needed no announcement. He was older, his face a road map of deep lines etched by sun and sorrow. But his back was straight, and his eyes, even from this distance, seemed to burn with an unholy intensity. This was no random patrol. They knew. They knew she had the child. The cabin, once her sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The single door, the 2 small windows, they were vulnerabilities, not defenses. For what felt like an eternity, there was only silence, a standoff between the lone woman in the cabin and the silent sentinels outside. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Finally, the central rider dismounted. He moved with a fluid grace that belied his age, his footsteps making no sound on the hard-packed earth. He walked slowly, deliberately towards her door, his hands open at his sides in a gesture that could be peace or a prelude to violence. Lena's knuckles were white on the stock of the rifle. Her mind raced. If she fired, the others would surely overwhelm her. If she did nothing, what then? The man stopped 10 feet from the door. He did not speak. He simply stood, his dark eyes fixed on the cabin, as if he could see through the sod-brick walls, through her fear, and into her very soul. Summoning a courage she didn't know she possessed, Lena slowly unlatched the door and opened it a crack. The warrior's gaze met hers. There was no malice in it, but a profound, heart-wrenching sadness that took her aback. "You have something that belongs to the Sikangu," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, like stones shifting in a riverbed. It was not a question. Lena's throat was dry. I found him." She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "He was alone. The Coyotes." The man's eyes flickered with a brief, sharp pain. "The boy is Wapasha. He is the son of my daughter." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the twilight air. "He is my grandson." A wave of relief and terror washed over Lena. This was the grandfather. He had come for his own. She should have been glad. The responsibility, the danger could be lifted from her. But the thought of handing Leo over, of letting him go, was like a physical blow. "I saved him," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I saved his life." The chief, for he could be nothing less, nodded slowly. The spirits work in ways we do not always understand. They chose a strange vessel for this task. His eyes scanned her, taking in her swollen belly, her disheveled state, her fierce protective stance. He saw not a threat, but something else. He took a step closer. "My daughter Tashina has walked the spirit road. Her son was taken from her, left for the Sungmanitutanka, the Coyotes." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "We followed the tracks. We found the beasts scattered. We found your trail leading from the ravine." He looked past her into the dim interior of the cabin, his eyes finding the small crate where the baby lay sleeping. "You have given him water. You have given him warmth. You have given him your heart song." Lena didn't understand what he meant, but she felt the truth of it. Her frantic, fearful heartbeat must have been a lullaby to the child in her arms. "The people would see you as a thief," the chief continued, his voice dropping lower. "A white woman who has stolen a child of the Lakota. They would call for your blood. But I am the chief. I am Kale, and I see what the spirits have shown me." He raised his hand, palm forward. "You faced the pack. You did not run. You, a woman carrying a child of your own, offered your life for a child of our blood. The great spirit Wakantanka has bound you to him. This cannot be undone." Lena stared at him bewildered. "What do you want?" Chief Kael's gaze was piercing. "He is of my blood. Now you are of my blood, in the eyes of the spirits, and now in the eyes of his people. You are his mother. You are Wihake Chiapo." She shook her head, uncomprehending. "Wihake Chiapo." "Mother of my blood." Kael translated his voice, resonating with an ancient power. He was not asking her. He was declaring a truth she could not escape. "You will care for him. You will protect him. And we will protect you." He turned and gestured to one of the younger silent warriors. "This is Chaitan. He will remain. He will watch over the mother of my grandson." With that, Chief Kael turned, mounted his horse, and without a backward glance led his other warriors away into the encroaching darkness. He left Lena standing in the doorway of her cabin, the rifle hanging limply in her hand, her world completely and irrevocably shattered. She was no longer just a pregnant widow. She was the guardian of a Lakota child under the protection and the watch of a powerful chief. And outside, a silent, stoic warrior named Chaitan had taken up his vigil, a living symbol of the impossible promise that had just been forced upon her. The days that followed were thick, with a silence that was more unnerving than any noise. Chaitan the Lakota warrior was a ghost at the edge of her world. He never came close to the cabin, never spoke a word. She would see him at dawn, a statuesque figure on a small rise to the east, watching the sun climb the sky. At midday, he would be a shadow in the sparse copse of cottonwoods by the creek. At night, she knew he was out there in the overwhelming darkness, a silent, sleepless guardian. His presence was a constant reminder of the bizarre pact Chief Kael had forged. Inside the cabin, life revolved entirely around Leo. The infant Wapasha, as his grandfather had called him, was a demanding and miraculous creature. Lena's initial fear began to subside, replaced by a fierce, consuming love. She learned the nuances of his cries, the sharp, insistent demand for food, the softer, fretful whimper of discomfort, the sleepy murmur as he drifted off. Lacking mother's milk, she resorted to a desperate concoction of goat's milk from her single nanny goat, watered down and sweetened with a touch of molasses fed to him from a rag. It was a poor substitute, but he was a fighter. He drank, and he grew stronger. Her connection with the child was visceral. When she held him, she felt the steady thrum of her own baby kicking in her womb, a strange double rhythm of life that she had been tasked to protect. The loneliness that had been her constant companion since Thomas's death receded, pushed back by the immediate overwhelming needs of the tiny being in her arms. The alliance with Chaitan was one of gestures. One morning she awoke to find a brace of rabbits, cleaned and dressed, lying on the stone step outside her door. She hesitated, her town-bred suspicion warring with her practical need. But her supplies were dwindling, and the journey to Redemption's Bluff was one she now dreaded. That evening she cooked the rabbits into a stew, and when she was done, she ladled a generous portion into a bowl and left it on the same stone step, a silent offering of thanks. By dawn, the bowl was empty, washed clean, and sitting beside a small pile of freshly gathered wild onions. This became their routine, their language. A dead rattlesnake, its head crushed, would appear near the woodpile. She would leave a loaf of freshly baked bread. He would leave a handful of medicinal herbs she recognized from a book her mother had owned. It was a fragile truce, a partnership born of necessity, and a shared unspoken purpose, the well-being of the child. But the world was larger than her small homestead. After 2 weeks her flour was gone, and her salt was running low. The trip to Redemption's Bluff could no longer be postponed. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. How could she explain the baby? She couldn't leave him, and she couldn't hide him. She bundled Leo, tightly securing him in a sling she had fashioned from a blanket, tucking him close against her chest. As she hitched her old mule Daisy to the buckboard, she felt Chaitan's eyes on her. For the first time, he moved from his perch, walking not towards her, but towards the trail that led to the town, before melting back into the landscape. It was a subtle acknowledgment, perhaps even a warning. Redemption's bluff had not changed. It was a single dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church, and the sheriff's office. But as Lena drove the buckboard down the main thoroughfare, the town felt different. Or perhaps she was the one who had changed. Doors seemed to close as she approached. Faces appeared in windows, eyes wide, with a mixture of pity and curiosity, which quickly hardened into suspicion when they saw the dark-haired baby nestled against her. Her first stop was the general store run by a gaunt, perpetually sour man named Peterson. As she entered, the low hum of conversation among the few customers abruptly ceased. All eyes went to her swollen belly, and then to the sling. "Lena," Peterson said, his voice flat. "Didn't expect to see you." "Needed supplies, Mr. Peterson?" she said, trying to keep her voice even. A woman near the counter, the wife of the town blacksmith, whispered loudly to her friend, "Look at that. And her Thomas not even gone a year and a half. Shameless!" Lena's face burned. They thought, of course. They thought she had taken a lover. But their whispers turned to confused muttering when Leo shifted and his distinctly native features became visible. The atmosphere in the store curdled from disapproval to alarm. "Where did you get that?" Peterson demanded, abandoning all pretense of civility. His eyes, small and hard, were fixed on the baby. "I found him," Lena said, her voice shaking slightly. "He was abandoned." Just then the bell above the door chimed and two men entered, casting long shadows into the store. One was Sheriff Bart Jones, a big man whose gut strained the buttons of his vest. The other was the town's spiritual shepherd, Reverend Michael, a thin, severe man with eyes that seemed to constantly be searching for sin. "Lena, Sheriff Jones," said, his tone attempting friendliness but failing. "Folks are talking. Say you've got company out at your place." "I found a baby sheriff, left to die," she said, standing her ground. Reverend Michael stepped forward, his face a mask of pious concern. "A heathen child, Lena, an unbaptized savage. You must not let this darkness into your home. It is a temptation, a test from the devil to lead you astray from your grief." "He's not darkness," Lena snapped, clutching Leo tighter. "He's a baby, and he was going to be eaten by coyotes." "An Indian baby," the blacksmith's wife spat. "Whose is it? Did the Lakota give it to you? Are you consorting with them?" The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Consorting with the Lakota was tantamount to treason in Redemption's bluff. The memory of raids from years past was still a fresh scar on the town's psyche. Sheriff Jones held up a hand. "Now let's calm down. Lena, the law is the law. An abandoned child has to be dealt with through the proper channels. You need to turn him over to me. We'll figure out what to do with him." Figure out what to do with him. The words chilled Lena to the bone. They saw Leo not as a person but as a problem to be disposed of. She looked at their faces, the sheriff's lazy authority, the reverend's cruel righteousness, the townsfolk's fearful hatred. She knew with absolute certainty that handing Leo over to them would be a death sentence just as sure as the Coyotes had been. "No," she said, her voice low and firm. "What did you say?" the sheriff asked, his eyebrows raising. "I said no. He's in my care. He's staying with me." Reverend Michael pointed a long, bony finger at her. "You are inviting a serpent into your hearth, woman. You would choose this spawn of the wilderness over your own kind, over God's law." "I'm choosing to protect a child," Lena retorted, her fear being burned away by a hot, cleansing anger. "Something you and your God seem to have forgotten how to do." She grabbed her sack of flour, threw the coins on the counter without waiting for change, and pushed past them out into the hostile sunlight of the street. She could feel their eyes on her back, a physical weight of condemnation. As she untied Daisy and climbed back onto the buckboard, she saw that the entire street had gone quiet. Everyone was watching her, the widow who had returned from the wilderness with a Lakota baby and a defiant heart. She was no longer just an object of pity. She was an outcast, a traitor, and she was trapped not just between the town and the Lakota, but between her past and a future she could never have imagined. The journey back to the homestead was a blur of righteous anger and rising panic. The open hostility of the town had shaken Lena more than she cared to admit. She was well and truly alone, now cast out by her own people. Her only ally was a silent warrior who hunted for her, and her only comfort was the sleeping infant whose presence had caused all this trouble. As the days turned into another week, a strange domesticity settled over the cabin, an island of calm in a sea of peril. The silent partnership with Chayton deepened. He left not just food, but small practical things, a tightly woven water skin that kept water cooler than her canteen, a handful of flint for her striker. It was clear he was reporting back to Chief Kyle that her every move, her every interaction was being noted. She was being tested. One evening, as a storm gathered on the horizon, rumbling like a distant war drum, Lena was changing Leo's wrappings. As she unwound the soft buckskin, something small and hard pressed against her fingers. It was the beaded pouch she had found with him in the ravine, the one that held the eagle feather. In her frantic first days, she had tucked it away and forgotten about it. Curious, she emptied its contents into her palm. The single eagle feather lay there perfect and sacred. But there was something else, something she had missed. A small, tarnished object no bigger than her thumb. She rubbed the grime away with her sleeve. It was a silver locket, intricately engraved with vines and flowers clearly of white manufacture. It was the sort of thing a lady from back east might wear. Her heart began to pound. This changed everything. This was a link, a clue. With trembling fingers, she found the tiny clasp and pried it open. The locket fell open into two halves. On one side, protected by a sliver of glass, was a miniature hand-painted portrait of a young woman. She had soft, fair hair, blue eyes, and a gentle, almost melancholy smile. Her face was achingly familiar. Lena stared, her mind racing, sifting through the faces of Redemption's bluff. And then she knew. It was Abigail Price. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Abigail, the daughter of Jedediah Price, the wealthiest and most powerful man in the territory. Jedediah owned the sprawling P-Bar ranch that bordered these lands, and his influence ran deep in Redemption's bluff, funding the church and keeping Sheriff Jones in his pocket. But it was impossible. Abigail Price had died almost a year ago. The whole town had mourned her. The official story preached from Reverend Michael's pulpit was that she had been taken by a sudden virulent fever that had swept through the ranch. Lena remembered the somber funeral, the way Jedediah, a man of iron will, had seemed to crumble with grief. On the other side of the locket opposite the portrait was a tiny folded piece of paper. Her fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled to unfold it. On it, in delicate looping handwriting, were two words, Miwapasha, Wapasha. The name Chief Kyle had called the baby. Lena sank onto the stool by the hearth, the locket heavy in her hand, the implications crashing down on her. Leo was not a full-blooded Lakota. He was half white. He was Abigail Price's son, and his father was a Lakota warrior. Tashina Chief Kyle's daughter wasn't the mother. She was. What a protector, a friend. The official story of Abigail's death was a lie. A fever didn't leave a secret baby with a Lakota name. A scandal of this magnitude, the daughter of the town's patriarch bearing a child with a Lakota man, would have destroyed the Price family name, a name Jedediah valued above all else. What had really happened to Abigail? A chilling thought crept into her mind. Had she run away to be with her lover, or had something more sinister occurred? People like Jedediah Price did not allow their legacies to be tarnished. They cut out the rot. They buried their secrets sometimes literally. This locket was proof, it was truth, and it was dynamite. If she took this to Sheriff Jones, what would happen? Jones was Jedediah's man. The locket would disappear, and she would likely follow suit. If she confronted Jedediah himself, she would be signing her own death warrant. Her only option was Chief Kyle. He had a right to know the full truth about the child he believed was his daughter's. A sudden brilliant flash of lightning lit up the cabin, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm had broken. Rain began to lash against the window pane. In the sudden light, she saw Chayton no longer on the distant rise, but standing near the cottonwoods 100 yards away, looking not at the storm, but directly at her cabin. He knew. Not the details, perhaps, but he sensed the shift, the discovery. He was waiting for her next move. Clutching the locket, Lena looked from the portrait of the gentle, sad-eyed girl to the face of the sleeping baby. This boy Leo was not just an outcast. He was a bridge between two worlds and the living, breathing evidence of a secret that someone had killed to keep. Chief Kyle had called her Wihake Chiyapo, mother of his blood, believing the child to be his full-blooded grandson. Now she held the proof that this was not true. How would he react? With gratitude for the truth or with fury at the deception? She had thought the greatest danger was the prejudice of the town. Now she understood she was standing on a fault line, a place where the secrets of the white man and the sorrows of the Lakota converged, and the tremor that would tear it all apart was resting in the palm of her hand. The storm passed, leaving the air washed clean, and the earth smelling of rain and sage. For 2 days, Lena wrestled with her discovery, the silver locket, a cold, heavy weight in her pocket. To reveal its secret was to ignite a fire, but to keep it hidden felt like a betrayal to the two people at the heart of the mystery, the dead girl in the portrait and the living child in the crib. On the morning of the 3rd day, Chief Kyle returned. He came as he had before, with 4 warriors materializing out of the morning mist that clung to the plains. This time, Lena did not wait in the cabin. She met them outside, Leo held securely in his sling against her chest. She had made her decision. Chayton joined the group, his stoic expression giving nothing away, as he spoke quietly to his chief in the flowing Lakota tongue. Kale's eyes, ancient and sharp, moved from Chayton to Lena, and then to the determined set of her jaw. He dismounted and approached her, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as he looked at the baby. "He is well," Kale stated. It was a fact, not a question. "Chayton tells me you are a good mother." "I do my best," Lena said, her voice steady. "But there is something you must know. Something that changes things." She held out her hand, palm up, the silver locket resting in the center. Kyle looked at it, his expression unreadable. He did not take it. "It was with the boy," he said. "Yes, I did not see it at first," she explained. "Open it." With a gravity that suggested he already knew this was a moment of significance, Kyle picked up the locket. His large, weathered fingers, surprisingly nimble, worked the clasp. He stared at the two halves for a long time, his face a mask of stone. He looked at the portrait of Abigail Price, then at the name Wapasha written on the paper. The silence stretched taut and heavy. "The daughter of the rancher Price," he said at last, his voice a low rumble. He snapped the locket shut, the sound like a final judgment. "So the blood is mixed." "I thought Wapasha was your daughter's child," Lena said softly. Kyle's gaze drifted to the horizon, to the hazy blue line of the distant hills. "My daughter Tashina," he began, his voice filled with a profound sorrow, "was not the boy's mother. She was his protector. Her heart was big enough to love a child not born of her own body." He turned back to Lena, his eyes locking with hers, demanding she bear witness to his story. "Tashina, she understood the world of the white man better than most. She learned your tongue, your ways. She saw the good and the great evil in it. She met the rancher's daughter Abigail by the creek that marks the edge of their land. They were not supposed to meet, a Lakota woman and a white girl, but they did. They became friends, sisters of the heart. The story unfolded, painting a picture Lena could never have conceived. Abigail, trapped in the gilded cage of her father's ambition, found freedom and understanding in Tashina, and Tashina saw in Abigail a kindness she had not expected from her people's oppressors. The girl Abigail fell in love. Kael continued, his voice laced with the bitterness of memory. Not with a warrior of my people, with one of her own, a young man who worked for her father, a good man, Tashina said, but poor, unworthy in the rancher's eyes. They met in secret. The child, this child, was born of that secret love. What happened to the father? Lena whispered. Jedediah Price found out. He had the boy run off his land, threatening to kill him if he ever returned. He told the girl the boy had abandoned her. He locked her away to hide the shame of her growing belly. The cruelty of it stole Lena's breath. Jedediah hadn't just buried a scandal. He had systematically destroyed his own daughter's happiness. Abigail knew what her father was capable of. Kael said, his jaw tightening. She knew he would not allow the child to live a bastard grandchild to stain his name. She sent word to Tashina. They made a plan. My daughter would help her escape, would take the child and raise it as her own among our people, where the blood of its father would not matter. They would say the child's Lakota father had died, and Tashina was his widow. Our people would accept this. He paused, the pain in his eyes deepening. But the plan went wrong. The night they were to flee, someone came. Not the girl's lover. Someone else. There was a struggle. My daughter. Tashina was killed. He choked on the words, the stoic chief's facade cracking for a brief, heartbreaking moment. They took the baby. I believe they meant to kill him too. But perhaps they were spooked. They left him in the ravine. A cowardly act. They left him for the Coyotes, a death they could blame on the wilderness. Jedediah Price. Lena breathed the name, tasting like poison. It had to be him. The man's heart is a frozen rock, Kael agreed. He killed my daughter to hide his secret. He stole this child's mother, his father, and tried to steal his life. And he has mourned his own daughter in public while knowing he was the cause of her death. He looked from the locket back to Lena. I called you Wihake Chiapo because I thought you had saved the son of my daughter. I was wrong. The truth is more complex. This boy carries the blood of the white man, the very people who have taken our land and murdered our children. But he was protected by my daughter's spirit, and he was saved by your courage. The bond the Great Spirit forged is not weakened by this truth. It is made stronger. He handed the locket back to her. This, he said, tapping the silver case, is a dangerous truth in your world. You cannot face the rancher alone. What do we do? She asked, her voice now intertwined with his cause. I have honored the peace treaty. I have kept my warriors from the lands of the whites, even as they poison our water and kill the buffalo. Kael said, his voice hardening into cold steel. But a man who murders my daughter and leaves a child to be torn apart by beasts has broken a law older than any white man's treaty. He has broken the law of the earth itself. His gaze was intense, and Lena felt a profound shift in her role. She was no longer just a protector. She was a witness, an instrument. You are the boy's mother now in the eyes of all, Kael declared. You live in their world. You must be my eyes and ears. Watch the rancher. Listen to the whispers in the town. This locket is the beginning of the story. The end has not yet been written. Find the rest of it, Wihaka Chiapo. Find the proof that will show Jedediah Price to his people for what he is, a murderer and a thief of life. He was not asking her to be a spy. He was anointing her as an agent of justice, a mother fighting for the truth of her son's past. He turned to leave, but paused. "Chaitin will remain," he said. "Do not be afraid. You are no longer alone." As he and his warriors rode away, Lena clutched the locket. The secret it held was no longer just a burden, but a weapon. And she, a pregnant widow on a forgotten homestead, had just been tasked by a Lakota chief to wage a silent war against the most powerful man in the territory. The weeks that followed were a quiet, nerve-wracking, cold war. Lena lived with the constant humming tension of her secret. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like an approaching rider. She watched the distant P-Bar ranch through Thomas's old spyglass, seeing the tiny figures of cowboys moving like ants, wondering which of them were loyal to Jedediah Price and which might know the truth about what happened to Abigail. Chaitin remained her silent, watchful guardian. His presence was a comfort, but also a stark reminder of the stakes. He had begun to teach her things not with words, but with actions. He would leave plants on her doorstep and then demonstrate from afar how to crush them into a poultice or brew them into a tea. He was preparing her not just for survival, but for the coming conflict. Her own pregnancy was advancing her body, growing heavy and tired. The baby within her was a constant living clock, counting down to a moment when she would be at her most vulnerable. The thought of giving birth alone with only a silent warrior outside and a hidden war brewing was a new and potent source of fear. The breaking point came on a blistering hot afternoon. Lena was outside, hanging Leo's washed linens on a line, when she saw a figure stumbling across the plains from the east. It was not a rider. It was a man on foot, staggering with exhaustion, his clothes in tatters. Her first instinct was to run, to barricade herself in the cabin. But as the figure drew closer, a jolt went through her. The shambling gait, the shape of the shoulders. It was impossibly terrifyingly familiar. "Thomas." The name was a choked whisper on her lips. The man collapsed 50 yards from the cabin, falling face first into the dirt. Lena forgot her fear, forgot her pregnancy, forgot everything but the ghost who had just appeared on her doorstep. She ran her heart a wild drum against her ribs. She rolled him over. It was him. Thinner, his face covered in a wild matted beard and burned by the sun, but it was her Thomas. His eyes were wild, unfocused, and a feverish heat radiated from his skin. "Lena," he croaked, his voice a dry rasp. "Is it really you?" "Thomas, oh God, Thomas!" Tears streamed down her face as she cradled his head. She had mourned him, buried him in her heart, and here he was, alive. With a strength she didn't know she had, she managed to half-drag, half-carry him back to the cabin. As she passed the cottonwoods, she saw Chaitin standing in the open, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. His eyes were not on her, but on the man she was dragging, his face a grim, stony mask. She got Thomas inside, laid him on their bed, and gave him water. He drank greedily, life seeming to seep back into him with every drop. And then he saw him. He saw the crate by the hearth and the dark-haired baby sleeping inside. His fever-bright eyes widened. "Lena? What is this? Whose child is that?" The joy of his return curdled into icy dread. How could she explain? Where could she even begin? But before she could speak, Thomas's gaze grew distant, and he began to shiver, his mind retreating back into the delirium that had claimed him in the wilderness. For 2 days she nursed him. He drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering fragmented, horrifying things. He spoke of being trapped in the dark after the mine collapse, of digging his way out of wandering for months, lost and half mad in the Black Hills. He spoke of being found by a Lakota hunting party, of being held captive, of escaping. And he spoke of a fire. The ranch, fire in the distance. He'd mutter, his eyes wide with a remembered horror. "I was hiding, trying to get back to you. Saw them by the creek. The old man. Price. He was there. Arguing with the Indian woman." Lena's blood ran cold. She sat by his bedside, piecing together the fractured narrative. Thomas, making his desperate way home, had stumbled upon the scene of Tashina's murder. On the third day, the fever broke. Thomas woke up weak but lucid. His eyes found hers, and this time they were clear. "I saw it, Lena," he said, his voice weak but firm. "I saw what happened to that Lakota woman. It was Jedediah Price, and he wasn't alone. Sheriff Jones was with him." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening clarity. "They were arguing." Thomas continued, his voice trembling. "Tashina was trying to protect someone hiding them behind her. Price was shouting about his family's honor, his legacy. He grabbed at her and she fought back. The sheriff. He drew his pistol. He didn't mean to, I think. She lunged and it just went off. She fell. And then Price, he saw me. In the bushes. He saw me." This was why Thomas had never made it home. They had hunted him. He had fled back into the wilderness, the hunters becoming the hunted. As this revelation settled, the sound of hoofbeats approached the cabin. Not the steady rhythmic beat of Lakota ponies, but the heavy, urgent thud of shod horses, many of them. Lena looked out the window. A posse of a dozen men, led by Jedediah Price and Sheriff Bart Jones, was riding hard towards the cabin. They weren't coming for a discussion. They were armed for a war. Someone must have seen Thomas's return. Someone had told Price that the only witness to his crime was alive. "He's come to finish it," Thomas whispered, trying to push himself up. "To silence us both." Suddenly, Jedediah's public campaign against her made perfect sense. It wasn't just about the shame of a half-breed grandchild. It was a preemptive strike. By painting her as a Lakota sympathizer, a traitor, he was justifying what he was about to do. "Lena Vance," Sheriff Jones's voice boomed from outside. "You are harboring a fugitive and a stolen child. By the authority of the territory of Wyoming, I order you to come out with your hands raised. Stolen child. He was using Leo, his own grandson, as an excuse to commit murder." "They'll kill us," Lena said, her mind racing. "They'll burn the cabin and say we resisted." "They will," Thomas agreed, his eyes finding the Winchester leaning against the wall. But just as he reached for it, a new sound pierced the air. A high, ululating cry that seemed to come from all directions at once. A war cry. From the ravine, from the cottonwoods, from behind the rise to the east, Lakota warriors on horseback appeared as if from the very earth. At their head was Chief Kyle, his face painted for battle, and beside him, his knife drawn, was Chayton. They formed a silent, deadly ring around the cabin, trapping the posse between them and Lena's home. Jedediah Price's face, once flush with righteous fury, turned pale with shock and fear. The hunter had just walked into the jaws of a much larger predator. The reckoning had come. The quiet homestead had become the epicenter of a war with Lena, her newborn baby kicking inside her, and her resurrected husband at its heart. The world outside the cabin froze. The confident posse now caught between the cabin and a ring of silent Lakota warriors shifted nervously. Jedediah Price's face, pale with fury, turned on Chief Kale. "This is my land!" Price bellowed, his voice straining. "We are here on official business to reclaim my stolen grandson from that traitor." It was a desperate, masterful lie. But before it could take root, the cabin door opened. Lena stepped onto the porch, followed by the ghost the town had long since buried. Thomas, gaunt but alive, leaned on the doorframe, his eyes burning with righteous fire. A wave of shock rippled through the posse. "He's not a traitor," Thomas called out, his voice stronger than his frame. He pointed a trembling finger at the patriarch. "And that baby isn't stolen. He was abandoned. I know because I saw Jedediah Price do it. I saw him and Sheriff Jones at the creek right after they murdered a Lakota woman named Tashina to cover up the scandal of the child's birth." The accusation coming from a dead man shattered the posse's resolve. All eyes turned to Sheriff Jones, who shrank in his saddle. "Lies, he's mad!" Price roared, but the panic in his eyes betrayed him. Seeing his authority crumble, his sanity snapped. "She defied me! My own daughter shamed my name with a bastard child! I did what I had to do. I cleansed my family's honor." The raw screamed confession hung in the air, damning him completely. In that moment of stunned silence, Lena cried out a sharp gasp of pain as she grabbed the porch railing, her knuckles white. Her baby was coming. The sight of her pain, of his final witness still standing, sent Price over the edge. With a wild scream, he spurred his horse forward, drawing his pistol to silence Thomas forever. But he was too slow. An arrow flew from Chayton's bow, burying itself in Price's forearm. The pistol clattered harmlessly to the dust. Chief Kyle gave a sharp cry, and his warriors surged forward. The posse, their will broken, threw down their guns, wanting no part of Price's madness. The brief, pathetic battle was over before it began. Another wave of pain washed over Lena, and Thomas was instantly at her side, guiding her back into the cabin. Chayton was right behind them, turning to stand guard at the door, a silent sentinel against the chaos outside. The world shrank to the four walls of the homestead. As Chief Kyle oversaw the binding of Price and his disgraced sheriff, the timeless elemental drama of life began inside. Hours later, as the sun set, a new cry joined the sounds of the evening, strong, healthy, and full of life. Lena, exhausted but triumphant, held her newborn daughter. Chief Kyle entered the cabin, the scent of battle replaced by the scent of birth. He looked at the scene, Thomas, the returned husband, Leo, the catalyst, sleeping peacefully, and Lena, the new mother, holding her daughter. He walked to her side. "I called you mother of my blood to protect my grandson," he said, his voice soft with reverence. "But the spirits chose you for more. You have faced down murderers and brought new life into this world. You have a warrior's heart." He placed the eagle feather from Leo's basket beside the newborn girl. "A blessing for the new life," he said. Then he pressed a smooth blue stone into Lena's hand. "In our world, this means safe passage. You are not just a protector of one boy. You are Wianoyate, a woman of the people." Lena looked at her family, forged in fire, loss, and love. Her husband returned from the grave, her daughter a sign of new beginnings, her son the Lakota boy who started it all. She was no longer a widow, an outcast, or a victim. She was a bridge between two worlds, and her home was the capital of a new kind of nation, a family built not on a single bloodline, but on a shared, unbreakable spirit. And so Lena's story becomes a legend, whispered on the Wyoming wind. A story of how a lone pregnant woman faced with the savagery of the wild didn't just survive, she became a queen in her own right. Her kingdom a small cabin, her subjects a family born from the ashes of conflict. She became the mother of two peoples, a symbol that courage and compassion are a language understood by all, capable of healing the deepest wounds. This tale is a reminder that the most dramatic life-altering moments often come not from a gunshot, but from a choice. The choice to act, to protect, to love, in the face of fear. If Lena's incredible journey from widow to warrior mother moved you, please honor her story. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a story of true strength, and subscribe for more tales from the untamed heart of the Wild West. Your support allows us to keep these legends alive.